The morning sun cast long shadows across my front lawn as Meredith Sinclair, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, stood in handcuffs, her perfectly styled blonde hair now disheveled from struggling against the federal marshals. Her voice, usually so commanding at neighborhood meetings, cracked with desperation as she screamed about her rights and demanded to speak to the chief of police. The uniformed officers remained unmoved, methodically guiding her toward the waiting patrol car while crime scene technicians continued documenting evidence inside my home. My neighbor, Robert Chen, emerged from his house, coffee mug in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. He approached one of the officers cautiously and asked what on earth was happening. The marshal's response was matter of fact, but carried weight that made Robert's jaw drop. "She broke into a federal judge's home. That's a felony. Let me back up and explain how we got here. My name is Marcus Blackwood, and I've served as a federal judge in the Eastern District for the past 12 years. After presiding over several high-profile organized crime cases that resulted in death threats against me and my family, I decided to relocate to Willowbrook Estates, a gated community in the suburbs of Riverside. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd moved here seeking peace and quiet, only to find myself embroiled in the pettiest yet most legally significant conflict of my career. I deliberately kept a low profile when I moved in 6 months ago. My townhouse was modest by neighborhood standards, and I introduced myself simply as Marcus, a government employee. I attended no HOA meetings, joined no committees, and politely declined invitations to wine tastings and book clubs. All I wanted was to come home after long days in court to tend my small garden and enjoy the silence I'd earned. That silence was first broken 3 months ago when I received my first compliance notice from the HOA. The letter, printed on unnecessarily ornate letterhead, informed me that my window blinds were not regulation white, but rather eggshell, a violation of Section 12(3) of the HOA bylaws. I found this amusing considering the blinds came with the house when I purchased it from the previous HOA-approved owner. The notices escalated quickly after I failed to respond to the first one. Week 2 brought complaints about my mailbox, which apparently needed repainting despite looking identical to every other mailbox on the street. Week 3 introduced concerns about the small American flag I'd hung beside my door, which Meredith claimed exceeded the approved dimensions by 2 in. By week 4, she was demanding I remove the bird bath from my backyard, citing attraction of wildlife as a neighborhood nuisance. Each notice grew more aggressive in tone, shifting from friendly reminders to stern warnings to outright threats of fines. What Meredith didn't know was that I'd spent years dealing with actual criminals who made actual threats. Her passive-aggressive letters about lawn ornaments barely registered on my concern meter. I continued to ignore them, focusing instead on a complex RICO case that demanded my full attention. My silence seemed to infuriate her. She began leaving voicemails at all hours, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she reminded me of my obligations as a homeowner in Willowbrook Estates. She even showed up at my door one evening, clipboard in hand, demanding to discuss my violations in person. I politely but firmly told her I was not interested in discussing the matter without proper legal documentation of these alleged violations and closed the door. That's when things took a disturbing turn. Meredith began telling neighbors I was hiding something. She suggested at the monthly HOA meeting that residents who refuse inspections might be running illegal businesses or worse, from their homes. She proposed mandatory quarterly inspections for all properties, which the board narrowly voted down thanks to a few sensible members who valued their privacy. Undeterred, Meredith decided to take matters into her own hands. On a Thursday afternoon, while I was presiding over a complex securities fraud case 50 miles away, she made her move. Using an old contractor access code she'd somehow obtained, she bypassed my security gate and entered my home through the back door. What she didn't realize was that my house wasn't just protected by a basic alarm system. Due to the credible threats I'd received over the years, the US Marshal Service had installed a comprehensive security system in my home, complete with cameras in every room except the bathrooms. These cameras fed directly to a monitoring station, staffed 24/7 by federal agents. The moment Meredith crossed my threshold, she triggered alerts that set a swift response in motion. Inside my home, Meredith went to work with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. She photographed everything from my book collection to the inside of my refrigerator. She opened closets, examined medications in my bathroom cabinet, and even had the audacity to sit at my desk and rifle through papers I'd left there. Finding nothing scandalous, she began rearranging items to photograph them in violation of her imaginary standards. The pinnacle of her intrusion came when she entered my bedroom. There on my nightstand, she placed a bright red violation notice, detailing 23 infractions she discovered during her inspection. These ranged from possessing non-regulation hangers in my closet to having too many law books in my study, which she claimed created a fire hazard. She signed it with a flourish and even took a selfie beside my bed, presumably to document her thorough inspection. While Meredith was conducting her illegal tour, the monitoring station had already dispatched units to my home. Federal marshals arrived within minutes, establishing a perimeter and preparing to apprehend what they initially believed might be a serious security threat. They watched in real time as Meredith moved through my house, documenting her every action through the security feeds. By the time I received the urgent call from Marshal Davidson, Meredith had been in my home for nearly 30 minutes. I immediately excused myself from court, explaining to my clerk that there had been a security breach at my residence. The 40-minute drive home felt like hours. As I processed what was happening, someone had violated not just my privacy but potentially compromised my safety and that of future witnesses who might need protection. I arrived to find my usually quiet street filled with federal vehicles. Marshalsies had already secured the scene and were waiting for me to provide a formal statement before making the arrest. Inside, crime scene, technicians were photographing everything Meredith had touched, collecting fingerprints from surfaces and bagging the violation notice she'd left as evidence. Marshal Davidson showed me the security footage on a laptop in my driveway. Watching Meredith move through my home with such casual entitlement made my blood boil in a way few things could. Her behavior showed a complete disregard for law, privacy, and basic human decency. She'd weaponized her position as HOA president to satisfy her own curiosity and need for control. After giving my statement, I made a call to District Attorney Patricia Williams, with whom I'd worked on numerous cases over the years. Patricia listened to my account with growing incredulity, especially when I mentioned the security footage and federal monitoring involvement. She assured me this would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, not just because I was a judge, but because this type of abuse of power could not be tolerated in any community. The arrest itself was almost anticlimactic. Meredith emerged from her house wearing designer workout clothes, clearly prepared for her afternoon pilot's class. Her expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to outright panic. As Marshal Davidson read her rights, she kept insisting there had been a misunderstanding that she had authority as HOA president to inspect properties for compliance. When the Marshalsies informed her she was being charged with breaking and entering, criminal trespass and impersonation of a federal officer. Since she claimed to be conducting an official inspection, her protests reached a fever pitch. She demanded to call her husband, her lawyer, the mayor, anyone who might extricate her from this situation. The officers simply continued processing her arrest with professional detachment. The local news picked up the story within hours. Meredith's mugshot showing her previously perfect makeup smeared from tears and her expression one of complete shock became the lead story on 3 different stations. The headline, "Federal Judge's Home Invaded by HOA President," ran alongside security footage showing her rifling through my personal belongings. The next morning, Meredith's preliminary hearing was held in federal court, ironically in the same building where I typically presided, though obviously with a different judge handling her case. Judge Thompson, known for his non-nonsense approach to abuse of power cases, set bail at $50,000 and ordered Meredith to have no contact with me or any other Willowbrook Estates residents while the case was pending. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that evening. With Meredith unable to attend due to her legal troubles, Vice President James Morrison presided. The vote to remove Meredith from her position was unanimous, with several board members expressing shock at her actions and apologizing to me personally for the harassment I'd endured. They also voted to implement new policies requiring written consent from homeowners before any property inspections and invalidating all existing contractor codes. The criminal case against Meredith proceeded swiftly. Faced with irrefutable video evidence and the testimony of federal marshals, her attorney advised her to accept a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to criminal trespass and abuse of authority, receiving 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and a $10,000 fine. The federal charges related to entering a protected residence added another year of probation and an additional $15,000 in fines. But the criminal penalties were just the beginning. I filed a civil suit for invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of federal protection statutes. My attorney's estimated damages could exceed $100,000, not including legal fees. Meredith's homeowner's insurance refused to cover intentional criminal acts, leaving her personally liable for any judgment. The professional consequences were equally severe. Meredith worked as a real estate agent for Platinum Properties, one of the area's premier firms. Once news of her arrest and conviction spread, the brokerage terminated her employment immediately, citing reputational damage and breach of their ethics policy. Her real estate license was suspended pending a full review by the state board, effectively ending her career in property sales. The social fallout in Willowbrook Estates was swift and complete. Former friends distanced themselves, declining her calls and avoiding her at the grocery store. The very power structure she'd built through intimidation and manipulation crumbled. Overnight, several residents came forward with their own stories of Meredith's overreach, though none as extreme as breaking into homes. At her sentencing hearing, Meredith stood before Judge Thompson, no longer the imposing figure who terrorized homeowners over paint colors and plant choices. She wore a conservative black suit, her hair pulled back simply, all traces of her former imperious bearing gone. When asked if she had anything to say, she attempted an apology, but it rang hollow, focusing more on how the situation had affected her rather than acknowledging the seriousness of her crimes. Judge Thompson's response was measured but firm. He spoke about the sacred nature of one's home, the trust communities place in their elected representatives, and the particular severity of violating the residence of a federal official. He emphasized that her actions weren't a simple mistake, but a calculated abuse of perceived authority that could have had serious security implications. The final tally of consequences was staggering. Between criminal fines, restitution, and the civil judgment, Meredith faced financial obligations exceeding $150,000. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. She was barred from serving on any HOA board or in any fiduciary capacity for life. The federal conviction would remain on her record forever, making future employment in any position of trust virtually impossible. As the bailiff prepared to escort her out, Meredith's face crumbled. The reality of her situation, the complete destruction of the life she'd built on petty power and control, finally hit home. She looked around the courtroom as if searching for allies, but found only the stern faces of justice. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, no words adequate to express the magnitude of her downfall. The woman who'd invaded my home seeking evidence of my supposed violations had discovered only the harsh truth of her own criminal behavior and its consequences.